Ethan Cole was born into a world of gold and luxury, but inside he felt like he didn't belong there. His father, Richard Cole, was one of the richest men in the country, a billionaire who built a huge tech company from nothing. People called him a genius, a visionary, a man who turned everything he touched into success. Everyone expected his only son to follow in his footsteps, but Ethan was different. He wasn't like his father. He was quiet, unsure, and often lost in his thoughts. School was hard for him. Words danced on the page whenever he tried to read, and numbers made him nervous. Teachers said he was lazy. Tutors said he wasn't trying hard enough. His father said he was wasting his potential. Every morning, Richard would stand at the breakfast table reading the newspaper, while Ethan pushed food around his plate, wishing he could disappear. "You have every advantage, Ethan," his father would say. "Private schools, top tutors, everything a boy could need. Yet you fail every test." Ethan would lower his eyes, unable to answer. He wanted to tell his father that he tried, that he stayed up nights reading until the words blurred. But how could he explain that something inside him just didn't work the way it did for others? The mansion they lived in was always full of people, drivers, gardeners, cooks, guards, but it still felt empty to Ethan. The only person who ever spoke to him kindly was Grace Williams, the maid. She had been working in the house for almost 10 years. She was in her late 40s, soft-spoken but firm, with eyes that saw everything. She always called him young man and smiled no matter how busy she was. Grace came from a small town far away. She had grown up with little money, raised by her grandmother who taught her that every person has something special inside, even if others can't see it. Grace worked hard all her life, and she never let her circumstances define her. She treated everyone with respect, even when they didn't do the same for her. One afternoon, Ethan sat in his study room, staring at his homework. His tutor had just left in frustration after an hour of trying to teach him math. The man had shouted, "I can't help someone who doesn't want to learn," and slammed the door on his way out. Ethan felt tears rising in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. He didn't want anyone to see him cry. Grace was walking down the hall when she heard the noise. She peeked through the half-open door and saw Ethan sitting alone, his head resting on his books. Quietly, she stepped inside. "Young man," she said gently, "why are you sitting here all sad like the world has ended?" Ethan looked up, surprised. "It's nothing, Grace," he said, forcing a weak smile. "You wouldn't understand." "Oh, I've seen that face before," Grace replied, putting down the laundry basket. "That's the face of someone who's trying so hard that it hurts." Ethan sighed. "Everyone thinks I'm dumb," he said softly. "The tutors, the teachers, even my dad. I just can't get things right." Grace pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "You know," she began, "when I was your age, I thought I was dumb too. I couldn't spell half the words in my books. My teacher told me I'd never make anything of myself. But my grandmother used to tell me, 'Grace, you don't need to be the fastest to reach your dreams. You just need to keep walking.'" Ethan blinked, unsure what to say. "But it's different for me. My dad expects me to be perfect." Grace smiled softly. "Perfection isn't real, child. Even the brightest stars in the sky have dark spots. What matters is that they keep shining." For the first time, Ethan felt a small warmth inside. Someone understood him, not as a project, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person. Grace didn't talk to him like he was broken. She talked to him like he was worth something. That evening, Grace noticed Ethan again in the library, staring blankly at a page. She didn't say much, just brought him a cup of hot chocolate and sat beside him while she dusted the shelves. Sometimes she would tell him small stories from her life, about how she learned to bake when her oven didn't work, or how she once fixed her radio just by listening closely to its sound. Ethan laughed more that night than he had in months. Days turned into weeks. Grace kept watching the boy struggle and thought deeply about what she could do. The expensive tutors gave up so easily, but she couldn't. Something in her heart told her that this boy wasn't hopeless. He just needed someone to teach him differently. One morning she found him in the garden, staring at the flowers. "Ethan," she said, "you see those roses? They bloom when they're ready, not when someone tells them to. You can't rush them, but you also can't stop them. You're just like that. You'll bloom when it's your time." He smiled faintly, and for the first time he believed her. That night, when his father came home, Richard barely noticed the change. He was too busy talking on the phone, complaining about another business meeting. But Grace noticed everything. Ethan started reading short stories on his own, little by little. He began asking questions again, curious about things. His laughter returned to the halls. Still, Richard only saw the grades. He told another tutor to come the next week, even though Ethan begged him not to. "This is for your future," Richard said sternly. "You'll thank me one day." Grace overheard this and felt her heart ache. She wanted to tell the man that success isn't built only on books, it's built on belief. But she knew her place in that house. She was just the maid. So she said nothing, for now. That night, Ethan found her cleaning the kitchen. "Grace," he whispered, "thank you for talking to me. You make me feel like I'm not stupid." Grace smiled, wiping her hands. "You're not stupid, young man. You just learn in your own way. And that's nothing to be ashamed of." From that night, something silently changed between them. Ethan began to look forward to seeing her. She didn't teach him from books. She taught him from life, simple, honest lessons that touched his heart. And while the world still saw a failing boy, Grace saw a spark of something far greater waiting to shine. What she didn't know yet was that this spark would soon grow into a fire that would surprise everyone, including the billionaire himself. Ethan's quiet world slowly began to change after Grace started spending time with him. She never called it a lesson, but every evening after dinner she would find a reason to visit the study room. Sometimes she came to clean the shelves or water the plants. But Ethan knew she was really there for him. She would start by telling him small stories about her own life. She talked about growing up in a small house with a leaking roof and how her grandmother used to sit by the window, mending clothes by candlelight. "We didn't have much," Grace said one night, "but we had faith that tomorrow would be better if we worked hard today." Ethan listened closely. He loved the way Grace spoke, simple, warm, full of truth. She never made him feel like a failure. Instead of telling him to study harder, she told him to believe that he could learn. Slowly, her words began to settle deep in his heart. One evening, Grace noticed Ethan struggling to read a paragraph from his history book. His eyes kept jumping over the lines, and he frowned in frustration. "These words, they move," he said softly. "It's like they don't want me to read them." Grace placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ethan," she said kindly, "maybe it's not that you can't read. Maybe you just read differently." She thought for a moment, then pulled out a blank sheet of paper. "Let's try something new. Cover the rest of the page with this paper, and read one line at a time." Ethan followed her instructions, slowly reading the words out loud. To his surprise, it helped. For the first time, the letters stayed still. He looked up at her in wonder. "It's working," he whispered. Grace smiled proudly. "See? Sometimes the problem isn't in us, it's in the way we're taught." That night, Ethan read 2 full pages on his own. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Grace clapped her hands softly. "You're learning, young man. You're proving to yourself that you can do it." As days turned into weeks, Ethan began to wait for those evening sessions. Grace made learning fun. She didn't lecture. She used stories and simple lessons from life. When teaching him about effort, she told him about a small bird she once saw trying to build its nest. "It dropped the straw so many times," she said, laughing, "but it never gave up. And in the end, that nest was the strongest one in the tree." Ethan laughed and said, "Then I'll be that bird." Grace nodded proudly. That's the spirit. His confidence began to grow. He stopped hiding his books and started asking questions again. At school, his teachers noticed small improvements. He was still far from perfect, but he tried harder. He even began helping other students who struggled, showing them tricks Grace had taught him. Meanwhile, Richard, his father, remained unaware of Grace's quiet influence. He only saw the improved grades and assumed one of his tutors had finally done their job. "Maybe you're finally taking things seriously," he said one morning over breakfast. Ethan didn't correct him. He just smiled faintly. He didn't think his father would understand that the person who helped him most wasn't a high-paid expert, but the woman who polished the silverware and cleaned the floors. But one evening, things began to change. Richard returned home early from a business trip and decided to check on his son. As he walked down the hall, he heard soft voices from the study room. He stopped and quietly pushed the door open just a little. Inside, he saw Grace sitting across from Ethan. She was telling him a story about her grandmother again, her voice calm and full of warmth. Ethan was smiling, laughing even. On the table, there were books open, a notebook filled with messy handwriting, and a paper full of small doodles. "Now," Grace said, "tell me what you learned from that story." "That no one is born great," Ethan said proudly. "Greatness is built little by little." Like my reading, Richard stood silently watching. He had never seen his son so happy while studying. There was no fear in his eyes, no frustration, just curiosity and hope. For the first time, Richard saw what all the tutors and experts had missed. His son didn't need pressure. He needed patience. Later that night, after Grace had gone to her quarters, Richard sat alone in his office thinking. He remembered how he used to push Ethan so hard, believing that money could solve everything. But watching his son with Grace made him realize that true learning doesn't come from fear. It comes from encouragement. The next day, Richard called Grace to the study. She came in nervously, unsure why he wanted to see her. "Sit down, Grace," he said. "I saw what you've been doing for my son." Grace lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to overstep. I just wanted to help." Richard smiled faintly. "No need to apologize. You've done what no one else could. My son is changing because of you." Grace shook her head modestly. "No, sir. He's changing because he believes he can. I just reminded him of it." Richard looked at her thoughtfully. "All those experts, all that money, and the answer was right here in my own house." He paused.
"How did you know what to do?"
Grace smiled softly. "I just listened, sir. Sometimes a child doesn't need to be taught, they need to be understood." After that day, things slowly shifted in the Cole household. Richard began to show more patience toward Ethan. He asked about his day, sat with him at dinner, and even joined in on some of Grace's evening talks. The mansion, once filled with cold silence, began to echo with laughter again. But not everyone was pleased. One of the senior tutors, when told his services were no longer needed, scoffed. "You're replacing me with the maid?" he said bitterly. Richard simply replied, "I'm replacing failure with success." As for Ethan, he felt stronger every day. He started to see challenges not as signs of weakness, but as chances to grow. Whenever he stumbled, Grace would smile and say, "That's good. Falling means you're trying." One rainy evening, as thunder rolled outside, Ethan told Grace, "I used to be scared of storms. I thought they would never end." Grace chuckled softly. "Storms always end, young man, but they leave the air cleaner and the ground ready for new life, just like our struggles." Ethan looked at her and nodded. He finally understood. His struggles weren't curses, they were lessons. By the time the rain stopped that night, he knew his life had already changed forever. What none of them knew was that the world was soon going to find out about the maid who taught a billionaire's son the meaning of strength and belief. Months passed, and Ethan continued to grow in ways no one had expected. His confidence strengthened, and he began to tackle challenges with determination instead of fear. Every evening, Grace was there, quietly guiding him, helping him believe in himself and showing him that failure was not the end. It was only the beginning. At school, Ethan started to shine. His teachers noticed a difference, not just in his grades, which improved steadily, but in his attitude. He raised his hand in class without hesitation, offered to help classmates, and shared the lessons he had learned from Grace. Slowly, the boy who had once been labeled hopeless began to surprise everyone. One day, the school announced a speech competition. The topic was people who inspire us. Ethan wanted to participate, but he hesitated. He thought about his father, the tutors, and even himself, wondering if anyone would truly understand his journey. That evening, he sat in the study room with Grace. "I want to do it," he said quietly, "but I don't know what to say." Grace smiled warmly. "Say what's in your heart, young man. Speak about what changed you, not what others expected of you. Speak about truth and people will listen." Ethan thought for a moment, then nodded. He spent the next few nights preparing his speech. He wrote about his struggles with reading and learning, about the pressure from people who didn't understand him, and about the countless nights he spent feeling like he would never succeed. But most importantly, he wrote about Grace, how her simple words, her patience, and her belief in him had changed everything. The day of the competition arrived. The auditorium was full of students, teachers, and parents. Ethan stood behind the curtain, his heart pounding. He felt nervous, but he also felt a quiet strength inside, a strength Grace had nurtured in him for months. When his name was called, he stepped onto the stage. For a moment he froze, but Then he saw Grace sitting in the front row, smiling and nodding at him. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "People ask me who helped me become the person I am today," he said. "They expect me to say tutors, teachers, or even my father. But the person who changed my life was someone I never expected. My maid, Grace Williams. She taught me a secret. That effort is success, that mistakes are lessons, and that believing in yourself is the most powerful thing in the world. Because of her, I learned that failure is not the end but the start of something new." As Ethan continued, tears filled the eyes of many in the audience. Even his father, who sat stiffly at first, found himself moved by his son's words. He realized that the child he had pressured and judged for years had been quietly learning from the one person who truly cared. When Ethan finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. He looked at Grace, who clapped with tears in her eyes, and he smiled. In that moment, he knew that the lessons she had given him were worth more than any grade, any award, or any fortune. After the competition, Richard approached Grace and Ethan. His voice was soft, almost trembling. "Grace, I didn't understand before. You've done something no one else could. You've given my son courage, and for that I will always be grateful." Grace shook her head. "I only reminded him of what he already had, sir. He just needed someone to believe in him." Richard smiled, a mixture of pride and humility in his eyes. "Then we will make sure the world knows your story. I want to create a foundation in your name to help children who struggle the way my son did. They deserve a chance to shine, just like Ethan did." Ethan's journey continued. He excelled in school, eventually graduating with honors. He went on to become a motivational speaker, sharing his story with thousands of people. He spoke about the importance of belief, patience, and guidance from those who truly care. And every time he told his story, he made sure to honor Grace, the woman who had transformed his life when everyone else had given up. Grace, meanwhile, continued her work quietly, helping children in need. She never sought fame or recognition. For her, the greatest reward was seeing young hearts grow strong, just as she had done with Ethan. Ethan and his father grew closer too. Richard learned that wealth and expertise were not the only paths to success. He saw that love, patience, and understanding were equally powerful. The mansion, once cold and silent, became a home filled with warmth, laughter, and hope. Years later, when asked about his success, Ethan would always smile and say, "I didn't succeed because of money or experts. I succeeded because someone believed in me when no one else did." Grace Williams, our maid, taught me the greatest secret of all. Never stop believing in yourself. The story of Ethan and Grace spread beyond their city. People were inspired not only by the transformation of a struggling boy, but by the lesson that the most unexpected teachers can sometimes make the biggest difference. It reminded everyone that compassion, patience, and simple acts of kindness can change lives in ways that money and prestige never can. Even in the world of billionaires and high society, it became clear that real wisdom and success are not always found in wealth or status. They are found in the hearts of those who care, who see the potential in others, and who choose to nurture it, no matter their own position in life. And so, the boy everyone had given up on became a symbol of hope. The billionaire learned the value of understanding and patience, and the maid, who had once quietly worked in the background, became a hero without needing a title. Together, they proved that sometimes the smallest gestures of guidance and belief can spark the greatest transformations, and that the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected places. Ethan's life was no longer defined by failure. It was defined by courage, kindness, and the wisdom of the woman who saw his worth when the world could not. And Grace, who had changed a life in the quietest way, continued to change the world one heart at a time.